All right.
So we are currently recording. So as the moderator, basically speaking to the audience who's going to be watching this during the Fantasy Con between November 1st and 8th, I'd like to say thank you for coming by. We had a slightly larger panel than this at first, but a couple people dropped out, and we're down to 2 attendees and a moderator. And basically at this point, I guess I'm an attendee as well. I'll just start the same conversation. We won't have too much overlap with only 3 of us. And basically, the only difference between me and you guys is that I have the power of mute. I promise I'll try not to use it. I don't know about you guys, but I guess we should probably start off with a quick round of introductions. I'll go ahead and start as the moderator. My name is Guy Donovan. I'm helping out with Flavor of Fantasy in this first annual virtual Fantasy Con. And I am the author of the trilogy, 2 books done so far, The Dragon's Treasure. And 1 book is currently already available on Amazon. It's called Forgotten Princess Emona. The 2nd book should be available by the time you guys are watching this. It's releasing on the 28th. 2nd book in the series called A Cold White Home. Both are ebooks available on Amazon. I live in the wonderful warm state of North Dakota, and I think that's about all anybody needs to know about me. You were here first. How about we go to you next, Andy?
All right. Well, I am a fairly new author. I've been writing for a couple of years. I just released the first book in a series called The Last Bucellari, about a half-demon assassin.
Okay.
Pretty badass. I live in sunny California.
I used to live in California. Not anymore.
Yeah, where at?
How about you, David?
Well, I'm, I guess the oldest of you guys. I have a dog that's barking, which doesn't help. I published 37 books. My 38th will hopefully come out soon. I started writing in the 80s. I write sci-fi, fantasy, thrillers, mysteries, whatever strikes my fancy. But my most favorite genre is sci-fi fantasy.
Oh, that's fantastic.
My current series is called Tales of Nevia. The first book is Born to Magic. The 2nd book is The Dark Masters. The 3rd book does not have a title, and I'm 75,000 words into it. I don't know what else to say other than I love doing this stuff. And I live in New York.
I'm sorry, New York, you said?
New York, a little upstate, about 30 minutes outside of Manhattan.
Oh, wow.
Okay, all right. Not very upstate, a little bit upstate.
A little bit upstate.
A little bit upstate. Okay, all right. Well, you're only 36 books ahead of me, so watch out. I'm catching up.
I can't wait.
Okay, now with that out of the way, why don't we just get started, I guess. When we started with the concept of these panels, we came up with a whole bunch of topics. Really what we came up with was titles, really, more than topics. And one of them was how to write a better fight scene. And at the time, I was not going to be one of the moderators. Turned out I'm moderating this panel, obviously. Now, we never really got around to delineating exactly what was going to be involved, but the title alone is pretty straightforward. Now, there's any number of ways, I'm sure you'll agree, there's any number of ways that you can write a fight scene, and that you can write it well. It all depends on, to some extent, not to be too blunt, but the talent of the author who's doing it.
Of course.
Experience and whatnot. But there's any number of ways. I have in my trilogy, which is completely written, even if not completely published just yet, a number of fight scenes in it, despite the fact that my primary character is an 11-year-old girl and winds up the series at 17. So, given that, I've got an awful lot of fighting going on in it. Now, taking the role of the moderator and pulling myself out of this a little bit, we'll go back to you, David, since we went with the introductions to Andy first. Go back to you, David. What's your take on the best way to write a fight scene? Is it big or is it more intimate?
Well, it depends really on what the overall scene is, what the overall chapter is. I mean, you have a battle scene with hundreds of people. It's going to be big, and it's not going to be as concise and neat as it should be. When you have 1 or 2 or 4 or 5 people fighting, you're going to you've got to do it so that the people can see it. I mean, yeah, we're writing words, but as far as I'm concerned, a good fight scene is something that's visual, that you're going to see, that as you explain it in your writing, it takes the person away from the words and puts them into the scene, makes it work for them, for you. It could be as short as 2 paragraphs. It could be as long as 10 pages. It just depends on what it is.
Excellent point.
The series that I'm working with right now, The Tales of Nebbia, is a dystopian style fantasy set 3,000 years from now. There is no technology. So we're back to swords, that type of thing, but in a very different way. It combines swords with sorcery and with magic, but differently, because men do not possess the ability to have magic at this point, just women. Women fight with men. They fight with magic. Men fight with swords when they're going against the evil end of the world. Some women fight with swords and with magic. It all depends. So, you know, with that kind of a fight scene, there's a lot of description, and you have to be able to do it concisely enough to move the people into seeing what they're seeing, to watch a movie even though they're reading a book.
Okay. I guess follow-up question for you on that would be then, obviously in a series, you're probably going to do both and do combinations. Yeah, I'm hoping mine doesn't ring too. You're probably going to be doing both. You're doing a series, but what you've done so far, have you been writing smaller, I hesitate to say intimate battles, but have you been doing smaller fight scenes, or have you been doing great big Pelennor Fields kind of things?
No, usually it's smaller. I mean, I've done scenes where entire armies fight. I mean, I have a medieval fantasy where you had the Saracen army fighting the terrible Christians. You know, it depends on what you have, or the terrible Saracens fighting the Christians. I mean, both are terrible when they're doing what they're doing.
Yeah, of course.
So that's huge scenes, but in the huge scenes, in order to make it realistic, you have to have smaller fight scenes within the larger fight scene.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay.
So it's just a matter of how you're going to portray it. Primarily, you want to follow your protagonist. You don't want to just give an overall thing. Yeah, the great armies fought, but so and so really did the job.
Have you ever read Les Miserables?
No, to be honest, I haven't had the time to sit down.
Victor Hugo does about 150-page segue to a detailed account of the Battle of Waterloo from a macro scale.
I'm glad I haven't read it.
That I just don't want to get into.
I'm glad I haven't read it.
It's actually a fantastic book, but sometimes you got to skip some of those parts. All right, now not to cheat you, Andy. What's your take on all this? What's your experience with it? What's your preferred manner of handling?
Well, in my series, it's very much centered on one character. You live inside of his head, you see his thoughts. Everything is about him. So when he's fighting, it does focus on the movement, the sword strikes, the dodge, the duck, all of that. But it focuses on his reactions. When he takes a hit, how it feels, or what he sees, what he smells as he's going to fight. It's a very intimate fight scene, as it were. Inside, you know, some of the fight scenes, he's sort of not really in the moment, so he's kind of spacing out, or he's acting on instinct, so it's not broken down into individual actions. It's sort of someone comes, he kills them, because he's so badass at what he does. He's half demon, so he's incredibly well trained. So sometimes he can fight without really thinking about it, especially when he's facing someone who's got no real training. He's just sort of thinking while he's fighting. But then when he's really going against the big bads of the scenes, he has to pay attention. So it's really engaging him in the fight scene and what he's thinking, how he's reacting. Not so much narrating as much as giving you a look at what's going on in his head.
Okay, well, you touched on something there that's kind of interesting. So let's get into that a little bit. Do you do it from his point of view, or do you do it from outside as a more of an omniscient point of view?
No, I like to write from behind the character's eyes.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Because it makes it easier for me. I studied martial arts for a couple of years. So when I write a fight scene, I think, okay, if I was in this situation, if I was faced with this opponent with this weapon, and this is my weapon, and this is what's going on around me, how would I react?
Mhm.
And so it makes it so much easier to put myself in that situation.
Okay, all right. Well, then I just had a follow-up question in mind. Let me see if I can dig it out of my colander-like memory. So, let me go for this. A lot of people will only write first person. It's
Okay.
just, I did this, I did that. The Katniss Everdeen thing.
Okay.
Obviously, that's one example. But do you limit yourself to? I shouldn't say limit, but do you do just the first person, or do you change your POVs throughout scenes?
No, it's not first person. It's third person. Third person limited. I
Okay.
believe. Yeah, I don't like switching that omniscient point of view because I feel like it detracts from the character. I want my readers to identify with my character or the characters that I'm writing. So if I switched back and forth between that, it would detract.
The switching back and forth can be pretty tricky, can't it?
Yes, it is.
I tend to go, 1 second there, David, and we'll get right back to you. I tend to go a bit more on the omniscient side, but I do change points of view within a scene, but always after a scene break. And
Yes.
the very first thing I do once I make that scene break is to establish which character that this POV is now coming through. So
Yes.
with that little bit of hubris out of the way, go ahead, David. I don't want to take your time up.
No problem. No problem. Okay, I write from the omniscient and the third person. It just depends on the book. On this particular series, I do a lot of what they're now calling head swapping, which I really dislike because there used to be two primary forms, the omniscient and the first person as the basic thing. And I found the omniscient is always, for me, is always better in describing stuff because you can describe it both from the person's head and from the area surrounding them.
Mm-hmm.
I have a fight scene in the second book, which is basically it's a practice fight scene, even though it doesn't feel like it. The only thing that doesn't happen is somebody doesn't die, but the two main protagonists are being tested by 6 incredibly good fighters, and they're 3 each, and I'm flipping back and forth with transitional spaces to each one until it's over. But it depends on how you feel about the writing.
Mm-hmm, of course.
And how you can best describe it to the reader's best interest.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that gets back to what we were saying earlier about how, I guess I said it, but you guys agreed, right? That basically there's no one way to write this stuff. I mean, there's any number of ways to write anything.
Yeah.
And a lot of the time it's thinking outside the box, to use a little bit of a trite expression, that maybe comes up with something a little new. But there's really only so many ways you can do this stuff. Somebody picks up a sword and somebody tries to take somebody's head off with it. And there might be 1,000 other people around doing the exact same thing at the same time, or there might only be 1 or 2. So really, there's only so many combinations, I guess. Trying to think of a good segue here. If there's anything else that you guys would like to bring up, go right ahead. This is your time.
I've always wondered about how realistic authors try to make their fight scenes, because I've seen a lot of movies and TV shows and read a lot of books and comic books where for example, my character is an assassin and he is stronger and faster than your average human, but he doesn't waste his time doing all those flips and all of that. He'll literally punch someone in the throat to just take them out of the fight, to kill them and get it done and move on with the next. It's all about economy of motion. So I'm wondering how many other authors actually think about the fight scenes, if they actually know what it means to be able to fight as these characters.
Yeah, that's a good point. I know when I first started to try to write fight scenes, I hated what I had written. And I would sit and I would study, go into martial arts places and study what was going on. I remembered a lot from when I was in the Army. Which helped a lot. And then I studied sword fighting. And what I tried to do when I describe a fight scene is to take the actual movements and follow through with the movement. I mean, when you're somersaulting underneath the blade, it's not for show. It's because there's a person down 10 feet away that you have to take out before you have to take the guy who's trying to kill you right here, because it's easier to do it that way and it's safe. But you know, it's an economy of movement, not an extra amount of movement in order to do this. People who spread out the fight scenes with too many movements, their heroes got to get cut. I mean, it doesn't make any difference. If it's not concise and quick, the fight goes on too long, especially if you're in the middle of a big battle. You've got to fight a lot of people. You've got to get everything over with as quickly as possible.
Well, and that was something that I wanted to touch on a little bit, was some of what I've read, not just the self-published stuff, I might add, which I am myself. I'll put that right out front. But some of the stuff I've read in these fight scenes is I took one step forward with my left foot, and with my right foot I went this way, and my left hand was this, and my right. That drives me crazy. But finding that balance, because you do want to get that kind of cinematic feel for what the character's doing without necessarily laying it out like verbal choreography. Any particular tips from either of you guys about how you kind of boil that down to just the feeling of what's going on?
Yeah, here, let me do this. Let me see if I can find it really quick. Or Andy, if you have something to say, why don't you say it until I can? Here we go. Okay. Mikhail, taking out the first of his attackers, was backing away from the other two when they struck simultaneously. Flashes of sunlight reflected from his sword as he wove a defensible figure eight, deflecting their blades, and instead of backstepping, moved toward them. He sensed Arena's battle behind him, but kept his concentration fixed on his attacker. What he's doing was, instead of backing away and trying to protect himself, he's going in and going after them. He watched the two carefully as he parried the thrust and saw in a quick exchange when their eyes met and one on the left nodded imperceptibly. Something inside him flashed and he saw to the very last detail every movement they would make. The man on the right shifted slightly and sidestepped. When he did, the one on the left lunged forward in an attempt to push Mikhail toward the other. Instead, Mikhail moved directly to the man on his left, caught his sword with his own blade, spun. The tip of the blade reached the attacker's crossguard, and with a flick of his wrist, tore the sword from the man's hand. So, in 55 words, we've got one scene taken care of in there.
Mm-hmm.
It's just not my left foot moved, my right foot moved, but what he's doing in order to win or defend himself. That's the important thing. The
tactic as opposed to the laundry list. What about you, Andy?
Well, you see, listening to that scene, I find myself a bit distracted with everything but the fighting, and I feel like it took me out a little bit of what was actually going on. Like, from what I've read, the books that I find absolutely enjoyable, the best ones, are the ones that they hit the scene hard and fast. They do throw a little bit of description of the characters' maybe surroundings, but the importance of, like, for example, when you were saying his blade flashed the sunlight, how important is that to the actual fight scene? Like, if he uses the sunlight to blind his opponent, then yes, it matters. But saying the blade flashed in the sunlight, if you just said the blade flashed, it could just mean it's moving really quickly, and that keeps it focused on the actual fight scene. I don't want to cite my own work as being exemplary. I don't want to have that hubris. But in the one novel that I published, they commented, a number of the reviews were like, the fight scenes were eerily accurate, or very. It's really, in my opinion, it's all about setting the pace. You want to keep the reader engaged in the fight scene without it getting too technical. You want to make them put themselves in the character's head, so they feel, if he takes a blow, you feel, it hurts. And then you want to keep things moving at a decent clip.
Yeah, I agree with that completely, but you also have to look at another perspective, and that's the perspective of the way the book is written and how everything flows, how the prose flows, how the dialogue flows. If you're pacing it one way and then you're in the fight scene and you change everything and just make it bang, 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 it's going to throw the person off and take them out just as quickly as as too much description would take them out.
For sure.
Yep. Again, more than one way to do it. Either of you guys, I'm gonna throw a name out there, and let's see what expression I get on your faces as soon as they say it. Robert Howard.
Oh yes.
I have only recently started reading a little bit of Robert Howard. I mean, I got to almost 50 before it, and I finally popped my Robert Howard cherry. And I got to say, as pulpy as that is, and how as much as sometimes you read his work and you think, my God, this guy'd never get published nowadays. At the same time, his battle scenes are phenomenal. They're fast, they're furious, and I suspect, Andy, from what you've been saying, I've been hearing a lot of Conan in what you're talking about. So yeah, I just thought I'd throw the name out there and see what kind of looks I got, and I got exactly what I thought I would.
Yeah, no, Conan was actually sort of my intro to fantasy, as it were. I went
Books
from
or the movie.
The books, of course. Yeah. I went from Edgar Rice Burroughs' the John Carter of Mars series, which also have amazing fight scenes.
Absolutely, it's one of my all-time favorites.
Fight scenes.
Even and they read it to my little daughter.
They do get a little bit technical, the fight scenes, because he does explain sort of the techniques that they use. But then again, they give just enough detail to make it to help you see the picture without actually telling you. That's one thing that I found interesting with certain authors, is that they don't tell you, okay, he blocked high, then cut low, then did a crossbody block, but they just say they traded parries, going from high to low and back, like sort of leaving it deliberately vague, because you don't actually need to, I often find that you don't need to tell the exact sequence of events to paint a picture, because everyone's seen their, the movies and the TV shows and read the books to have their own idea of what a fight scene looks like. Mm-hmm. So instead of getting very technical, there are some things, when your main character does some clever trick to throw his opponent off guard, you do want to say that. Mm-hmm. But if it's just, beating at each other with swords, you don't necessarily need to get into, he's struck an overhead blow 5 times in a row to try to beat down his opponent's guard. You can get, he gets angry and he's like, okay, I'm done with this. I need to end this quickly before this guy kills me. So he battered at his guard. Things like trying to avoid necessarily getting to the technicalities and the prose, but also putting it, like finding that balance between the actual techniques, the prose, and then the character's emotions and feelings.
Well, and if you'll forgive the interjection here, there's something that I kind of wanted to bring up was, and I'm going to try to avoid getting too much into what I've done. It's not what this is about, but what I am doing involves a lot of the common Joe in 5th century Wales. They weren't highly trained warriors. They weren't supernatural sword-wielding barbarians. They're farmers with pitchforks. Yeah. And what I've tried to go after is just sort of that sort of untalented, raw, brutal aggression, including involving some Pictish warriors who would, of course, have a bit more experience than your average Welsh pig farmer. But yeah, there's the two sides. I think you got the professional soldier who's doing all the amazing things on the field, and you got this poor guy who's been conscripted and handed a wooden club and said, try not to die today.
Yeah.
Have either of you guys ever gone into that end, or do you stay pretty much on the heroic end of things?
I don't go into the heroic side of things. Mine is very anti-heroic.
Well,
so,
I only
like the star, right?
That protagonist that's so good at it.
I have written fight scenes with people who are untrained, and again, I find that the best way to do it is just to find the balance between the actual technique of it. For example, if you've got a guy with a pitchfork, he's not going to be hacking and slashing. He's going to be stabbing and trying to beat someone over the head. But so you've got that, then you've got sort of the vague descriptors of the motions. He's thrusting or he's blocking, but then you also got to get into his head. You've got to see how it makes him feel. Of course, this is with the limited perspective. If you're writing a big battle scene, then you don't get into the fear because, everyone knows that a battle scene is terrifying. But if you're looking at one character, you want to find that balance between the technique or the lack thereof, whether he's flinging a stick around or throwing rocks or whatever, and how he's feeling when faced with this guy in front of him. He's going to size up his opponent. He's going to say, okay, this guy's 1.5 feet taller than I am, and he's wearing heavy armor. So actually, one of the series that I'm working on right now is about a young girl who's sold to a thieves guild, and she starts out at 8 years old, and she's trained, and she doesn't have any discernible skills until much later on in the book. But she's fighting with someone who's 2 or 3 times her size, because she's the average girl. She's smaller than average, so there's no real skill. She's facing someone who's twice her size. So instead of trying to get into how she defeats him, which she doesn't, it's how it makes her feel to be so overwhelmed.
Okay, all right. Gents, I just got the notice, the 10-minute till the end of the meeting notice. So over to you, David, really quick. You had something you wanted to say.
Yeah, with what Andy said, that's very, as a lot of people look at Andre Norton and think she wrote mostly children's stuff, but Andre Norton did a lot of things with women just like that were sold to slave guilds that had different things happen, and those were very actionable, but never heavy this and that. It just got through what was necessary and did what was cool. One of the things I did in the first of the series was I had the main protagonist trained by the secondary protagonist. So they went through a lot of time of training with swords and knives so that the moves were there. I didn't have to heavily repeat them later on. And, because she was a sorcerer, she could use magic. He absolutely forced her never to use it during the training or even in a lot of the fights, so that she would be dependent and know how to use the sword more so than the magic. Because if you use both, you're going to not be able to concentrate equally. And once you do that, your fighting is gone. Doesn't matter whether it's magical or whether it's using weaponry. You have to have full focus, and the character has to have full focus in order to survive a big fight. That was all I wanted to toss in there.
Okay.
Come on, Dave. 38 books. You got to have more.
I got a lot more, but not in 10 minutes, and you guys have to have a chance as well.
Sure.
But,
Yeah.
Ask me questions on November 4th. And you want the 4th also?
You're talking about which day?
The 4th was Wednesday, the Epic Fantasy.
That's Epic Fantasy, and that's going to be my day. I assume yours as well, Dave and Andy?
I'm on Dark Fantasy Tuesday.
Oh, okay. All right.
I'll check in with you anyway and just bust your chops a little.
And speaking on behalf of everybody from Flavor of Fantasy, just because you're doing one particular day doesn't mean you can't be on the others. I plan on dropping in to all 8 days. And I also wanted to put out there in the last couple of minutes, well, actually, we got about 5 minutes left. I just wanted to put out there for you guys and as well as the viewers that are watching this right now to us, the future. These are going to be posted on, I don't know which day that these panels are going to be posted, but when they are posted, they're going to have their own separate threads, and there will be comments galore. So if there's anything that either of you guys wanted to talk about, or anybody out there who's watching this right now who wants to contribute, put it all in the comments. Absolutely, and we'll take that thread till next month if we have to.
That's
Yeah.
great.
So the whole point of this is to get people involved and start hearing some more opinions. So I guess start to segue on the way out. We're not quite out of time yet, but just off the top of your heads, David, your favorite fight scene ever. Let's confine it to books here, not movies.
My favorite fight scene ever is probably one that wasn't in sci-fi. I took it off of my mother's dresser. It was a Frank Slaughter book. I don't even remember what the book was. All I remember is it was set in the Holy Land, and it was 4 people fighting, and it just went on, and it was incredible, and it showed me that, wow, anybody can do anything. When it came to writing, it just blew my mind. What can I tell you?
Very cool.
I mean, that and some Mike Hammer books were really great too. Mickey Spillane books had some really good fight scenes in them.
What about you, Andy?
For like big battle scenes, I thought the Scott Backer series, The Thousandfold Thought, The Prince of Nothing, those ones, he had some excellent descriptions of like very wide, we're talking hundreds of thousands of people fighting. He did it very well, switching between the different characters. And then for an intimate fight scene between Scott Lynch's books, the Lies of Locke Lamora, Gentleman Bastard series, and Brandon Sanderson's newest Words of Radiance, Stormlight Archive series, they really do well because they do switch between the characters, but it's very much behind each character's eyes when they do it, and they really do just a beautiful combination of, like I was saying, the actual techniques that they're using, the surroundings, the pace, and then also the emotions that they're feeling as they're fighting.
Okay, all right. For myself, I'd have to say I'm kind of torn between two. One fairly obscure, hopefully not in this audience, but to most people it's fairly obscure, and one that everybody's going to know. Stephen Brust wrote a book called To Reign in Hell.
Okay.
Yeah, I see the head nodding, and that depiction of the war in heaven is one that just sticks with me, and not to mention the fact that Satan's not the bad guy in it. Hope I didn't give anything away for anyone who hasn't read the book yet, but that's the whole point. That, and of course, I'm probably going to get a lot of people going, "Oh God, of course, Helm's Deep."
Of course.
One of my probably my first really big experience in science fiction, or in fantasy, of course, was after I watched Ralph Bakshi's version of The Lord of the Rings and loved it, and thought, I got to read those books. And then I read the books and I realized how bad Bakshi's movie was. So yeah, as what was I? I was 12, I think, reading Battle of Helm's Deep. Yeah, that did it for me from then and there.
Wow.
But how unusual is that Lord of the Rings is like a big inspiration to a fantasy writer, right?
Yeah.
Okay, we have about 3 minutes left. I'm going to open it up just to you guys. Anything you guys would like to mention, talk about?
Andy?
Oh, yes. I've been thinking of this for the last little while. Something that I struggle with is dialogue in fight scenes. A lot of authors, and I made this mistake, make the mistake of trying to put dialogue between the fight scenes, you know. And if you've actually ever fought anybody in anything, boxing, martial arts, fencing, anything, you know how exhausting it is, and you realize that there is no wasted breath for dialogue.
Yep, absolutely.
You can't hack and slash at each other for just hours. It's literally 30 to 60 seconds of full-on intensity, and then you have to push back and take a breath and try to recover, and then again and again. But it's not these long, drawn-out things. Everything happens in the space of heartbeats.
Right.
Only in Hollywood, right?
It's time for a single word, maybe, and that doesn't matter other than, oh, God. Yeah. You know, it's you can't talk. You're fighting. How the hell can you talk?
Exactly.
See, David, we wound up doing conversations anyway.
If anybody has ever been in a fight, they know you can't talk.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, we are running up on the end of our time. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Andy Peliquin and David Wind, everybody. Please go ahead and rewind to the beginning of this if you can. Listen up to what they said they wrote and go read it, please. You might want to check out mine, too. All right, guys. I think that's about it. Again, when this is posted, please feel free to put more in the comments. We thought we'd have a lot more time than we do, but this is what we got. So, again, thank you very much. It was fantastic talking to you guys, and I wish you best of luck in the future.
Thank you so much.
It's been awesome to be here.
All right. Thank you. And with that,